Tammy Longy and Eric Longy Jr. On the morning of May 6, 2020, emergency responders arrived at a 3-bedroom home on the Spirit Lake Reservation in North Dakota. Inside, they found a 5-year-old girl named Raven Thompson lying motionless on a concrete basement floor. She had been placed there the night before by the 2 people entrusted with her care, her foster parents, because they did not want to hear her moaning in pain. Raven and her 7-year-old brother Zane had been placed with Tammy and Eric Longy Jr. in July of 2019, after their biological father was incarcerated. The Longys were members of the Spirit Lake Nation, and their home in Tokyo, North Dakota, already housed 13 people, including 8 children ranging from 11 months to 12 years old. What should have been a temporary safe haven became something far darker. The abuse was systematic and prolonged. Children in the home were struck with shoes, paddles, sticks, and hands. On at least one occasion, gray duct tape was placed over Raven's mouth. In the days leading up to her death, those who saw her described the child as lifeless, unable to walk or even sit up on her own. Yet no one sought medical care. The night before she passed, Raven was moaning and clearly in distress. Eric told Tammy to quiet the girl down, and together they carried her to the basement, leaving her alone on the cold concrete floor so they would not have to hear her suffering. When Tammy found Raven the next morning, there was nothing left to save. The autopsy revealed bilateral subdural hematomas from assault, along with abrasions and contusions across her head, neck, chest, abdomen, and extremities. The medical examiner concluded these injuries were consistent with multiple episodes of inflicted trauma over time. Raven's brother Zane was discovered in the back of an SUV at the property. He was hospitalized for over a month with heart failure caused by severe malnutrition and extensive bruising covering his small body. 7 children were immediately removed from the home. FBI and Bureau of Indian Affairs agents interviewed the Longys on May 10th, but did not arrest them immediately. The couple left their residence, claiming they had received death threats. Tammy even attempted to obtain a firearm. 5 days after Raven's death, on May 15th, both were arrested at a family member's home. How does a system meant to protect the most vulnerable place children in a home where 13 people already lived in 3 bedrooms, and where the abuse was so severe that a 5-year-old's injuries suggested months of repeated trauma? Because the Spirit Lake Reservation falls under federal jurisdiction, the case was prosecuted in the United States District Court for the District of North Dakota. Eric pleaded guilty in March of 2021 to first-degree felony murder within Indian country, along with 3 counts of child abuse and 1 count of child neglect. He later attempted to withdraw his plea, claiming he had been misled about its consequences. But Judge Peter D. Welty denied the motion. Tammy pleaded guilty on January 4th, 2022, to second-degree murder, 3 counts of child abuse, and child neglect. Sentencing came in the summer of 2022. On June 23rd, Eric Longy Jr. stood before Judge Welty and received life in federal prison, the mandatory minimum for first-degree murder. The judge described what the children had experienced in that home as hell on earth. On August 8th, Tammy Longy received the same sentence, life in federal prison, an upward departure from the sentencing guidelines that had suggested 210 to 262 months. Prosecutors had sought 360 months to life. The defense had argued for 240 months, citing Eric's controlling behavior over Tammy. The court was not persuaded. Eric appealed his conviction, but on January 17, 2023, the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals denied his appeal, affirming that his guilty plea was knowing and voluntary. Tammy's appeal was pending before the same court, and while no subsequent ruling has been publicly reported, it is presumed denied, given the parallel outcome. As of 2026, both Tammy and Eric Longi Jr. remain incarcerated in federal prison, where they will spend the rest of their natural lives. Raven Thompson was 5 years old. She will never grow older. The Longis were not the only foster parents to weaponize the system's trust. In Los Angeles, another child named Viola Van Cleef was placed with a woman who had already been flagged multiple times for abuse and neglect, warnings that went unheeded. Kiana Barker. Viola Van Cleef was nearly 3 years old when she was placed with Kiana Barker through a nonprofit foster agency called United Care. Viola's biological mother, Olivia Van Cleef, struggled with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia and had lost custody. The system was supposed to find Viola safety. Instead, it placed her with a woman who had 5 prior child abuse or neglect complaints on file, including one from 2002 that had been substantiated for severe neglect. Under California state rules, the inconclusive cases alone should have prevented Barker from ever becoming a licensed foster parent. But the paperwork was approved. Caseworkers also failed to discover that Barker's boyfriend, James DeWitt Julian, a convicted felon, was living in the home. Barker even operated a daycare. On March 4, 2010, Barker called 911 and reported that Viola had stopped breathing. The child was found unresponsive on the living room floor and was pronounced deceased upon arrival at a local hospital. Barker initially told investigators that Viola had choked on apple juice. Firefighters who responded to the scene noted something unusual. Barker displayed no emotional distress whatsoever. The Los Angeles County coroner told a different story. Viola had not choked. She had died from blunt force trauma inflicted by an adult, causing fatal internal bleeding. Bruising covered her lower back, buttocks, and thighs. When questioned further, Barker changed her account. She claimed Viola had somehow gotten stuck in a bed frame and that she might have accidentally hit the child with a hammer while trying to free her. A surgeon who examined the evidence testified that the injuries could not possibly have been caused by a bed frame. Prosecutors alleged that Barker had severely beaten Viola with a belt on March 3rd, approximately 1 day before placing the 911 call. The child had suffered for hours before anyone sought help. On July 15, 2010, arrest warrants were issued. Barker was taken into custody on charges of murder, child abuse, and dissuading a witness. Her bail was set at $1.1 million. Julian surrendered 2 days later. In a detail that speaks to the cold calculation involved, less than a month after Viola's death, Barker and Julian married. Julian pleaded no contest to accessory after the fact in December of 2011 and received 3 years in jail. Barker's case proceeded to trial in Los Angeles Superior Court. She took the stand in her own defense, maintaining that she had never inflicted the injuries that took Viola's life. When a woman with 5 prior abuse complaints is still approved to foster vulnerable children, is the failure individual negligence, or is it something embedded in the system itself? On October 18, 2013, after approximately half a day of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Kiana Barker was found guilty of second-degree murder, assault on a child causing death, and child abuse. On February 21, 2014, Judge Sam Ota imposed the maximum sentence, 25 years to life in state prison. Barker appealed. In April of 2015, California's 2nd District Court of Appeal upheld her conviction. In July of the same year, the California Supreme Court refused to hear further review. As of 2026, Kiana Barker remains incarcerated in a California state prison. She will not be eligible for parole consideration until approximately 2039. Viola Van Cleef was not yet 3 years old. She spent the final months of her short life in the care of a woman the system had been warned about repeatedly. Warnings that were documented, filed, and ignored. The failures in Viola's case were not unique to California. In Texas, a private foster care agency placed a 2-year-old girl named Alexandria Hill with a woman who had already failed 5 foster placements and accumulated 15 violations. The agency had even been explicitly warned that children should not be in her home. Cheryl Small. In 2012, a caseworker in Texas made a visit to the home of Joshua Hill and Mary Sweeney. During the conversation, Joshua mentioned that he smoked marijuana at night to help manage his seizures. That single admission was enough. The state determined it constituted neglectful supervision and removed their 2-year-old daughter, Alexandria, from their care. The system that was supposed to protect her placed her in a home where she would not survive. Alexandria, who went by Alex, was first placed with another foster family, where her parents reported noticing bruises during visitations and mold in the living conditions. She was then transferred to the home of Cheryl Ann Small in Rockdale, Texas, in January of 2013. Small was a 54-year-old licensed foster parent through a private agency called Texas Mentor. Her husband, Clayman Small, was a self-described recovering crack cocaine addict with multiple drug charges, facts that were known to the agency at the time they approved the placement. What the agency apparently overlooked was more alarming. Cheryl Small had already failed 5 previous foster placements. An early childhood intervention program had reported concerns about her being very frazzled and had explicitly warned that children should not be in the home. Alex arrived just 1 month after that warning was filed. Small would go on to accumulate over 100 additional violations as a foster parent. In her own words, she admitted that she made her living by keeping foster children. On the morning of July 29, 2013, Alex was placed in a 2-hour timeout for the offense of getting food before other household members had woken up. Later that day, Small called 911 and reported that the child had stopped breathing. Alex arrived at the hospital with no pulse, severe head injuries, and bruising on her buttocks, arm, and chin. Small initially claimed the toddler had fallen while running backward. Later, she said she had shaken the girl and accidentally let her go. Medical findings told a different story entirely. Alex had subdural hemorrhaging, subarachnoid hemorrhaging, and retinal hemorrhaging in both eyes. A pediatric abuse expert who examined the evidence testified that there was no doubt in his mind that this child's injuries were inflicted. Investigators believe Small slammed Alex headfirst into the ground after becoming frustrated. The child was transferred to McLean Children's Hospital, where doctors determined she was completely brain dead. On July 31, 2013, Alexandria Hill was taken off life support. She was 2 years old. First responders who arrived at the scene that day found something deeply unsettling. Neither Cheryl nor Clemens Small appeared panicked. No one had attempted CPR. No one was waiting outside for paramedics. The fire chief who responded called it one of the strangest scenes in his 25-year career. Cheryl Small was arrested on August 1st. State investigators cited 11 rule violations in the home, including exceeding the permitted number of children and inappropriate discipline methods. A Milam County grand jury indicted her for capital murder. Prosecutors chose not to seek the death penalty due to her lack of prior criminal history. How many warnings does a system need before it stops placing children in harm's way? The trial took place in the 20th District Court in Cameron, Texas, before Judge John Youngblood in October and November of 2014. Small took the stand in her own defense. On approximately November 4th, the jury found her guilty of capital murder. The conviction carried an automatic sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Small appealed. In May of 2016, a state appeals court affirmed her conviction, but she would not serve out her sentence. On December 15, 2016, Cheryl Small died at the Carol S. Young Medical Facility in Dickinson, Texas, where she had been transferred a month earlier. Her sister stated the cause was colon cancer. The official classification was natural causes. District Attorney Bill Torrey issued a statement that summarized the bitter math of the case. Small lived longer as a convicted murderer than Alex Hill lived her entire life. She had served less than 2 years of her life sentence. The case became a landmark example of the failures of private foster care agencies in Texas and prompted congressional scrutiny of the entire system. But for Alexandria Hill, that scrutiny came far too late. The failures that allowed Alex's death were systemic. But in Queensland, Australia, the betrayal was far more personal. A foster family did not just fail a 12-year-old girl named Tyale Palmer. They took her life to protect a secret, then carried her coffin at her funeral. If you're liking these true crime deep dives, and you don't want to miss the next one, consider subscribing. We drop new cases every week. Rick Thorburn. On November 5th, 2015, fishermen along the banks of the Pimpama River in Queensland, Australia, discovered partially decomposed remains. The following day, authorities confirmed the identity. It was Tyale Alyssa Rose Palmer, a 12-year-old girl who had been reported missing just days earlier. She had been in foster care since 2008. Placed with the Thorburn family in January of 2015 after a troubled early childhood. Tyale loved hip-hop dancing, cheerleading, and animals. She was supposed to be safe. The Thorburns of Logan City presented themselves as an ideal foster family. Richard, known as Rick, was approximately 55 years old. His wife Julene, along with their sons Trent and Joshua, completed the household. The family also ran a daycare from their home and had specifically requested children with high and complex needs. What happened inside that home was something no child should ever experience. Trent Thorburn, who was 18 at the time, had been harming Tyale when his parents were away from the house. On approximately October 27, 2015, Trent confessed to a cousin through Facebook that he had been inappropriate with Tyale and feared she might be pregnant. 2 days later, on the evening of October 29th, Trent tearfully confessed to his mother, Julene. She and the sons left the house. Between 7:30 and 9:30 that evening, Tyale was home alone with Rick. During those 2 hours, Rick Thorburn took Tyale's life. A later coronial inquest determined he most likely harmed her through asphyxiation or choking. His motive was to cover up what Trent had done and protect his family from criminal prosecution. When the family returned, Rick told them simply that he had taken care of it. Rick disposed of Tyale's body. On October 30th, he falsely claimed to have dropped her at school, then reported her missing that afternoon. The family formed a pact to lie to police. When Tyale's funeral was held, attended by over 600 people, Rick Thorburn served as a pallbearer. He carried the coffin of the child he had harmed fatally just days earlier. The investigation lasted nearly a year. Police bugged the Thorburn family home for approximately a month, intercepting private conversations. A critical anonymous tip and Trent's Facebook confession to his cousin proved pivotal. In a recorded phone call, Rick told his wife he would go to the grave with what he knew. Can a family that would bury a child twice, once in the ground and once under layers of lies, ever truly be held accountable? On September 20th, 2016, all 4 family members were arrested. Rick collapsed shortly after, and police suspect he attempted to end his own life through a pill overdose. He was placed in an induced coma for several days. He was charged with murder, interfering with a corpse, and attempting to pervert the course of justice. Additional charges followed, including harming an 11-year-old and attempting to harm a 4-year-old, both connected to his childcare business. Julene and Joshua pleaded guilty and agreed to testify for the prosecution. Joshua received 3 months. Trent was sentenced to 4 years for incest, perjury, and perverting justice. He was released in January of 2018 after serving just 16 months. Julene received 18 months, suspended after 6 months served. On May 25, 2018, Rick Thorburn pleaded guilty to murder before the Supreme Court of Queensland. Justice David Bottas called his actions despicable and sentenced him to life in prison with a non-parole period of 20 years, making him eligible for parole consideration in 2036. A coronial inquest in June of 2021, conducted by Deputy State Coroner Jane Bentley, rejected Rick's claim that Taya Lee's death was accidental. The coroner found him completely without remorse. The case prompted 29 recommendations for reform from the Queensland Family and Child Commission and a $6 million investment in child safety infrastructure. On April 11, 2025, at approximately 10 in the evening, Rick Thorburn was found unresponsive in a single cell at Woodford Correctional Facility. He was 64 years old and is understood to have taken his own life. He had attempted suicide at least 3 times during his incarceration. Trent Thorburn was released in January of 2018. Julene and Joshua Thorburn have also completed their sentences and been released. Tia Palmer was 12 years old. Her name now represents both a profound systemic failure and the painful limits of justice. The Thorburns were biological family to each other, bound by blood and complicity. But in Georgia, a former law student and her husband sought out foster children specifically, leveraging personal connections to gain custody of 2 little girls. One of them would not survive. Jennifer and Joseph Rosenbaum. Jennifer Rosenbaum had once been a foster child herself. She had lived in a group home, studied law at Emory University, and even interned at the Henry County District Attorney's Office. Her husband Joseph worked as a correctional officer. By 2015, Jennifer was running for a seat on the Henry County Commission. On the surface, the Rosenbaums appeared to be exactly the kind of people who understood the system and could provide a stable home for children in need. Layla Marie Daniel and her older sister Millie had been taken into Georgia's Division of Family and Children's Services custody in April of 2015. After their mother, Tessa Clendening, struggled with drug addiction. The girls were initially placed with experienced foster parents, the Lamberts, who had cared for children before. But Jennifer Rosenbaum lobbied for custody. She knew the children's birth mother from her own time in the group home and used that connection to gain access. The system failed at every checkpoint. DFCS caseworker Samantha White and her supervisor Tamara Warner classified the Rosenbaums as fictive kin, despite not meeting that legal criteria. They never screened Jennifer under her maiden name, which would have revealed her own foster history and potential red flags. The home evaluation was signed by an unauthorized person. Multiple people had raised concerns, including the Lamberts and a previous foster parent named Loretta Brown. None of it mattered. Layla and Millie were placed with the Rosenbaums anyway. In October of 2015, Layla, who was 2 years old, suffered a complete tibia fracture. Jennifer claimed it happened at a gymnastics facility. The facility's owner later testified that Layla had never been enrolled there. A pediatric orthopedist found the injury suspicious and told Jennifer to take the child to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. She never did. DFCS caseworker White made a home visit on November 2nd and failed to wake or examine Layla, a direct violation of protocol. On November 17, 2015, Jennifer called 911 and reported that Layla was choking on a chicken nugget. First responders found the child unresponsive with no pulse. There was no food in her throat. Her body was covered in bruises on her back, neck, and pelvis, with a visibly broken arm. She was pronounced deceased at Piedmont Henry Hospital. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation medical examiner ruled the death a homicide caused by significant blunt impact trauma. The autopsy revealed injuries almost too numerous to catalog. Her pancreas had been split in two. Her liver was lacerated. She had internal bleeding, broken bones in her arms and legs, over 20 bruises at varying stages of healing, and 11 separate injuries to her torso alone. There was no evidence of choking. Millie, who was 7 years old, was also examined. She had 15 bruises and 2 abrasions. She would later testify that the Rosenbaums spanked her and her sister with hands and belts. When a former law student who interned at the district attorney's office is approved to foster children despite multiple red flags, and when caseworkers violate their own protocols, who bears responsibility for what happens next? The Rosenbaums were arrested approximately 2 weeks after Layla's death. Caseworkers White and Warner were terminated on December 2nd, 2015. The couple was ultimately indicted on 49 counts, including malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, aggravated battery, and multiple counts of cruelty to children. Because Jennifer had interned at the Henry County DA's office, special prosecutors were appointed to handle the case. A significant setback came before trial when the Georgia Supreme Court suppressed electronic evidence, including phones, an iPad, and a MacBook, after finding that police had waited over 500 days to obtain warrants. Prosecutors proceeded without it. The month-long trial took place in July of 2019 before Judge Brian J. Amaro. Testimony came from first responders, medical examiners, DFCS workers, and 7-year-old Millie herself. The defense argued that Jennifer's panicked, frenzied CPR had caused the injuries. Layla's biological mother, Tessa Daniel, gave emotional testimony in which she blamed herself for ever losing custody. On August 1st, 2019, after 4 days of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Both defendants were convicted on approximately 36 of the 49 counts. Jennifer Rosenbaum was found guilty of felony murder, though acquitted of malice murder. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 40 years. Joseph Rosenbaum was found guilty of second-degree murder and received 50 years, with 30 to serve and 20 on probation. Both appealed. On October 15, 2024, the Georgia Supreme Court unanimously affirmed Jennifer's conviction, rejecting claims of ineffective counsel and conflict of interest. Joseph's conviction was upheld by the Georgia Court of Appeals, and the Georgia Supreme Court denied further review. As of 2026, Jennifer Rosenbaum is serving her sentence at Pulaski State Prison in Georgia. Joseph Rosenbaum is incarcerated at the Georgia Department of Corrections Long Unit, with a maximum release date of July 20th, 2049. Both defendants have exhausted their state appeals. In 2024, a United States Senate subcommittee report cited Layla Daniels' death among the systemic failures that have contributed to children's deaths within Georgia's foster care system. Layla was 2 years old. She had been in the Rosenbaum's care for less than 7 months. Liz Carroll and David Carroll, Jr. In the summer of 2006, nearly 3,000 volunteers searched the parks and neighborhoods of Cincinnati, Ohio, looking for a missing 3-year-old boy named Marcus Feasel. His foster mother, Liz Carroll, had appeared on television, tears streaming down her face, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. She described how Marcus had vanished from Julf's Park while she was watching him. She begged for his safe return. What those volunteers did not know, what the police did not yet know, was that Marcus had been dead for 11 days before anyone reported him missing. His foster parents knew exactly where he was. They had put him there. Marcus Feasel was born on June 24, 2003 in Middletown, Ohio. He was autistic, attended a special needs school, and was described by those who knew him as an awesome little guy who loved flowers, Bob the Builder, and Bubbles. Butler County Job and Family Services gained temporary custody in April of 2006, and a private foster care agency called Lifeway for Youth placed him with Liz and David Carroll Jr. in Union Township, Claremont County. The placement should never have happened. David Carroll had a known mental health issue that should have disqualified him. The agency was unaware that David's girlfriend, Amy Baker, was living in the home. In June of 2006, David was arrested on a domestic violence charge, but failed to report it as required. Family members later said that David resented Marcus's constant need for attention. On August 4, 2006, the Carrolls were preparing to leave for a family reunion in Williamstown, Kentucky. Marcus required supervision they were unwilling to provide. So they wrapped him in a blanket from his neck to his ankles, bound him with packing tape, and placed him in a playpen inside an upstairs closet. They left no food. They left no water. The temperature inside that closet reached between 105 and 115 degrees Fahrenheit. The Carrolls took their other children. They took their dog. They left Marcus behind. 30 hours later, they returned to find him dead from hyperthermia. His body had cooked in that closet while his foster family attended a reunion. What followed was not grief. It was concealment. David and Amy Baker placed Marcus's remains in a moving box, drove to an abandoned farmhouse in Brown County, purchased gasoline, and burned his body. What did not burn was thrown into the Ohio River. On August 15th, 11 days after Marcus died, Liz Carroll staged the disappearance at Julf's Park, claiming she had blacked out from low blood pressure and that Marcus had vanished. Firefighters noted that Liz displayed no emotional distress. On August 22nd, she held that televised press conference, weeping and pleading for information about a child she knew was already gone. When a foster mother can look into a camera and beg for the return of a child she helped dispose of, what does that reveal about the human capacity for deception? Police grew suspicious when no witnesses placed Marcus at the park and no trace of him was found. Hamilton County Prosecutor Joe Dieters subpoenaed Liz and Amy Baker to appear before a grand jury. Amy broke. She confessed everything, revealing the true events of that August. Detectives recovered bone fragments and clothing remnants at the abandoned farmhouse. Liz Carroll was tried over 10 days in February of 2007 in Claremont County. A jury of 9 women and 4 men deliberated between 4 and 6 hours before convicting her on all charges, including murder, involuntary manslaughter, kidnapping, felonious assault, and 3 counts of child endangering. She also pleaded no contest in Hamilton County to perjury, inducing panic and making false alarms. During the trial, the prosecutor's closing argument included a devastating observation. People say you would not treat a dog like that. And you know what? She would not. She took the dog with her. Liz blurted out in response that the dog was alive, as if that distinction somehow mattered. On February 22, 2007, Liz Carroll was sentenced to 54 years to life in prison. Consecutive sentences that included life for murder, plus 10 years for kidnapping. She has no possibility of parole until approximately 2060. David Carroll pleaded guilty to murder and gross abuse of a corpse and received 15 years to life. Amy Baker was granted immunity in Ohio and testified for the prosecution. Kentucky charged her with evidence tampering in 2007, but those charges were dropped in early 2008. David Carroll had his first preliminary parole hearing in July of 2022. The Ohio Parole Board denied parole in September of that year, finding he lacked insight into his criminal thinking and that release would not serve justice. Hundreds of community letters and both county prosecutors opposed his release. His next parole eligibility is May of 2032. He remains incarcerated. Lifeway for Youth had its license revoked in 2007 and ceased operations. The case produced 55 recommended changes to Ohio's foster care system, including guardian ad litem requirements and enhanced background checks. Marcus Feasel was 3 years old. He loved bubbles. The Carrolls disposed of Marcus's body to hide what they had done. But in Bali, Indonesia, a foster mother buried a child in her own backyard, then created a Facebook campaign to search for the girl she had already killed. Margriette Megawe. On June 10, 2015, nearly a month after 8-year-old Engeline Megawe was reported missing in Bali, Indonesia, police made a discovery in the backyard of the home where she had lived. Her body was found buried near a chicken coop, concealed beneath a red basket and chicken feed. The woman who had reported her missing, who had helped create a viral Facebook campaign called Find Angeline, Bali's Missing Child, was the same woman who had put her there. Margriette Christina Megawe, known as Telly, was 60 years old at the time of her trial. She was Indonesian of Manadonese background, living in Denpasar, Bali. Engeline's biological parents, Rosadik and Hamida, could not afford hospital costs when she was born, and the baby was adopted by Margriette and her late American husband, Douglas Bruce Scarborough, who worked in the oil and mining industry. He passed from a stroke in 2008. After the adoption, Engeline's biological parents were blocked from all contact with their daughter. For years, Margriette subjected Engeline to physical abuse. She stubbed out lit cigarettes on the child's body. She exploited the girl by forcing her to care for hundreds of chickens that were sold for profit. On May 15, 2015, Margriette beat Engeline until both of her ears bled, then slammed her head against a concrete wall. The following day, May 16th, she struck the child again, rammed her head into the wall, grabbed her by the hair, and threw her to the floor. Engeline died from head trauma. Margriette then burned the child's back with a cigarette to check if she was still alive. She was not. Margriette ordered her domestic worker and gardener, Auguste Handame, who was approximately 25 years old, to bury the body in the backyard near the chicken coop. That same day, Margriette and her older adoptive daughter Yvonne reported Engeline missing. The family created the Facebook page that would attract massive national attention across Indonesia. Yvonne even solicited ransom money from an Australian acquaintance, claiming kidnappers were involved. When a mother can bury her child in the backyard, then appear publicly as a grieving parent begging for help finding her, what line remains between calculated cruelty and something beyond comprehension? Bali police conducted an intensive investigation. When Engeline's body was discovered on June 10th, Auguste was immediately suspected. He initially confessed but recanted on June 18th, claiming the confession had been coerced. He accused Margriette of being responsible for the death. On June 28, 2015, police named Marguerite as the prime suspect. Forensic evidence from Sangla General Hospital and the police forensic laboratory supported the charges. Marguerite was charged under Indonesia's criminal code with premeditated murder, which carries a maximum penalty of death, along with murder, child abuse and neglect, and child exploitation. The 4-month trial at Denpasar District Court featured testimony from Auguste and forensic experts who detailed the injuries Engeline had suffered. On February 29, 2016, Marguerite was found guilty of premeditated murder, child exploitation, and physical abuse causing death. She was sentenced to life imprisonment. Auguste was acquitted of murder, but convicted of concealing evidence and child protection violations. He received 10 years. Margaret appealed to the Bali High Court. The appeal failed. She then filed a cassation appeal to the Indonesian Supreme Court, which was rejected in February of 2017. All convictions were affirmed. On December 6, 2024, Margaret Magawi died at the age of 69 while serving her life sentence at Karobokan Class 2A Women's Prison in Bali. She had been incarcerated since June 14, 2015, a total of 9 years, 5 months, and 22 days. The cause of death was stage 5 chronic kidney failure. She had been receiving dialysis twice weekly since July of 2024. Auguste's 10-year sentence would make him eligible for release around 2025, though his exact status has not been confirmed in English-language reporting. Engeline Magawi was 8 years old. She spent her final years being exploited and abused by the woman who was supposed to be her mother. Margaret fled from accountability through death. But in California, 2 foster parents who took a child's life fled in a more literal sense, escaping to Mexico and spending years on the FBI's most wanted list before justice finally caught up with them. Carla Torres and Alberto Garcia. On July 18, 2010, Carla Torres called her sister with news that would set off an international manhunt. 3-year-old Serenity Gandara, the biological niece of Carla's husband Alberto Garcia, had died. By the time the sister arrived at the home in southwest Bakersfield, California, Serenity's body was still on the living room floor. Carla and Alberto were already gone, along with their 3 biological children. They had fled to Mexico, leaving behind 4-year-old Isaiah, Serenity's surviving brother, alive but severely injured. Serenity and Isaiah had been placed with the couple after Alberto's sister lost custody due to drug problems. The couple was in the process of adopting both children. What should have been a path to stability became something far more sinister. The abuse was systematic and prolonged. Carla's own sisters later described her as having a violent temper, especially toward Serenity. Food was withheld from the children. One sister testified that Serenity appeared malnourished when she saw her. When Isaiah was found, his body was covered in bruises and scars, indicating months or years of abuse. At trial, both defendants blamed each other. Alberto claimed Carla beat the children with broom handles. Carla claimed Alberto beat both her and Serenity. On July 17, 2010, Serenity suffered at least 2 severe beatings at the couple's home. The pathologist who examined her body found a lacerated spleen, lacerated pancreas, lacerated stomach, and a skull fracture, all from blunt force trauma. The skull fracture occurred shortly before she died. She was found on the living room floor the following day. The couple's maternal grandmother would later reveal that she had previously warned Child Protective Services about abuse in the home. Nothing was done. After fleeing to Mexico, the FBI placed Carla Torres and Alberto Garcia on the FBI Sacramento Division's Most Wanted list for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Mexican authorities arrested them in February of 2012. The couple fought extradition for over 2 years before finally being returned to Kern County in October of 2014. More than 4 years after Serenity's death. When a system receives warnings about abuse and fails to act, and when perpetrators can flee across international borders for years before facing consequences, what hope exists for the children caught in between? Both were charged with first-degree murder, willful cruelty to a child, and for Torres specifically, assault on a child under 8, resulting in great bodily injury. The trial took place in April of 2016 before Superior Court Judge John R. Brownlee, with Deputy District Attorney Melissa Allen prosecuting. After just 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Both defendants were convicted of second-degree murder, a lesser charge than the first-degree murder originally sought, along with 2 counts of child cruelty. Torres was additionally convicted of assault on a child causing great bodily injury. Carla Torres was sentenced to 25 years to life, plus a consecutive 4-year term for child cruelty. She is eligible for parole in 2035. Alberto Garcia received 15 years to life, plus a consecutive 4-year term. His parole eligibility arrived in 2026. Both filed a joint appeal arguing errors in jury instructions. The 5th District Court of Appeal in Fresno upheld both convictions. Both defendants later petitioned for resentencing under California's Senate Bill 1437, a 2019 felony murder reform law. Each claimed they may not have been the actual person who took Serenity's life. Hearings were scheduled, but no published outcome has been confirmed. Given that their convictions were for second-degree murder rather than felony murder, prospects for resentencing relief appear limited. As of 2026, both remain incarcerated. Garcia's parole eligibility in 2026 means a hearing may be imminent or have recently occurred. Isaiah, Serenity's surviving brother, was adopted by another family and was reported to be doing well as of 2016. Serenity Julia Gandara was 3 years old. Her foster parents ran from what they did to her for 4 years before the law finally brought them back. Torres and Garcia exploited geography to delay justice. But in New York, an ordained minister and his wife exploited something else entirely, using a global pandemic to shield their abuse from anyone who might have stopped it. Daquan Green. On December 20th, 2020, emergency responders arrived at a home in Rotterdam, New York, where a 4-year-old foster child named Charlie Garay had allegedly fallen out of a small chair. When paramedics found him, he had no pulse. The injuries to his body told a story far different from an accidental fall. His liver was extensively damaged. His intestines were lacerated. The trauma was consistent with being stomped by an adult. Charlie was transported to Ellis Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. The autopsy ruled his death a homicide. Daquan Green was 29 years old and an ordained minister. His wife Latricia was 27. The couple had 3 biological daughters under the age of 5 and had been certified as foster parents by Schenectady County. Before receiving Charlie and his 5-year-old brother, they had fostered only 1 child for 1 day. The brothers were placed with the Greens on September 25th, 2020, by Albany County Child Protective Services. Over the following 3 months, the Greens subjected both boys to systematic physical and psychological abuse. The children were stomped on. They were beaten. They were forced to sit in small wooden chairs for hours at a time. If they fell asleep, water was dumped on their faces. Bedwetting was punished with cold showers. They were made to hold wall sits until their bodies gave out. Food was withheld. The abuse was captured on video found on Latricia's phone. Text messages between the couple revealed their awareness of what they were doing. In one message, Latricia wrote that there should be no more bruises and that they needed the children to heal. Clear evidence they knew the injuries were visible and that they were deliberately concealing them. The Greens exploited the COVID-19 pandemic to prevent foster care providers from conducting in-person visits. They claimed quarantine. They claimed illness. Every checkpoint that might have saved Charlie was blocked by their deception. On December 20th, after Charlie wet the bed, Daquan subjected him to a full day of abuse. That evening, he stomped on the 4-year-old's chest, causing massive internal injuries. Instead of calling 911, Green called his wife, who was out shopping. When Latricia returned, she made the emergency call. Green told first responders that Charlie had fallen out of a child's chair and began slurring his speech. When a minister can spend an entire day harming a child, then claim it was an accident from a fall, what does accountability look like? Rotterdam police led the investigation, supported by Schenectady County Child Protective Services, the New York State Police Computer Forensic Laboratory, and the District Attorney's Office. Charlie's brother was removed from the home and found to have extensive injuries of his own. Digital forensics uncovered the text messages and video evidence that would prove central to the prosecution. Daquan Green was arrested on January 22, 2021. After trial, on October 3, 2022, a jury convicted him of second-degree murder under the depraved indifference standard, first-degree manslaughter, and 2 misdemeanor counts of endangering the welfare of a child. The prosecution argued this was not a momentary loss of control, but a whole day of abuse. On December 6, 2022, Schenectady County Court Judge Matthew Sipniewski imposed the maximum sentence, 25 years to life. The judge's remarks were unusually direct. He told Green that he was not only a murderer, but a sociopath. He told him that when he arrived in prison, everyone would know what he had done. Green maintained his innocence, stating he was not a murderer. Green appealed both his conviction and his sentence. The appellate division ruled 4-1 to uphold both, finding that prosecutors had presented extensive evidence portraying systematic physical and psychological abuse, and that the force used reflected wanton cruelty and brutality. One dissenting justice argued the evidence did not meet the threshold for depraved indifference murder, but the majority disagreed. Green is not eligible for parole until 2046. Latricia Green faced her own trial. On June 23, 2023, she was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree perjury and 2 counts of endangering the welfare of a child. On August 25, 2023, she received the maximum sentence, 9 1/3 to 28 years in prison, plus a $6,000 fine, the exact amount the state had paid the Greens for fostering the brothers. A 36-year no-contact order was issued to protect Charlie's surviving brother. At the time of her arraignment, Latricia was still operating a drop-in childcare and preschool called Ebenezer's Dream Care Center. She had given birth to 2 more children since Charlie's death. A civil lawsuit filed in 2021 against Albany County, Schenectady County, and St. Anne Institute was in the discovery phase as of late 2022. Its resolution has not been confirmed. As of 2026, Daquan Green remains incarcerated, serving 25 years to life with his appeal denied. Latricia Green is incarcerated, serving 9 1/3 to 28 years. Charlie Garay was 4 years old. He had been in the Greens' care for less than 3 months. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more cases like these, subscribe. We cover stories like this every week. And if you want to keep going right now, click the video on screen. It is worth your time. See you in the next one.